In Path of Exile 2, a lot of endgame players, including a lot of content creators, are changing and making attribute stacking builds or adjusting their builds to be attribute stacking builds. But why do they do that? Why are the builds so powerful and so expensive? Hey, I'm Cyclon, and in today's video I will explain why attribute stacking is so popular, how it works, why it is expensive, how you can start it on a budget, and what Ascendancies are the best. Finally, I want to show my own version of an attribute stacker, which, considering how expensive those builds can get, is actually a fairly budget variant. And of course, a written guide to my version, including leveling and endgame, can be found in the description. Now, why is attribute stacking getting so popular? In Path of Exile 2, the way you scale damage for whatever build is you first need some flat damage, you then need some increased multipliers, some more multipliers, or some increased damage, then more multipliers, and finally your gem also has an inherent damage multiplier to it. And the best skills, like Gas Grenade or Magnetic Salvo, have an inherent damage conversion from physical to elemental, and a good damage multiplier. So most powerful builds are using fist weapons, convert the damage, and then deal massive damage, which means that the skills that are great at the game currently are not that many, because we are needing skills that rely on this fist conversion and this damage multiplier. Because flat damage, flat elemental damage, is just not great accessibility. We can get it on rings and gloves, sure, but on those we need a lot of defenses, we need life, we maybe need mana, we need resistances. It's just not that easy to gain flat damage on other items other than the weapon, and on the weapon it did get lowered quite a bit compared to the percentage fist numbers or PoE1 numbers. So with this we are limited to skills we can use. However, there's one item that absolutely overshadows every other source of flat damage taken once utilized correctly, and that is stat stacking. So what item is that? It's the Hand of Wisdom and Action, giving us 3% attack speed for 25 in dexterity and 1 to 10 lightning damage to attacks per 10 intelligence. So by having 200 intelligence, this is already as good as any decent fist weapon. By having 400 intelligence, this is as good as any of the best fist weapons in the game. And once you get to 500 or more intelligence, it overshadows every fist weapon we can have. So now every single attack skill is on the menu to be used. We now suddenly have all the percentage, we have all the flat damage we want, and if we scale some dexterity, we also have all the attack speed we want. And then we can add a Pillar of the Caged God on the top, and then scaling a little bit of strings to also gain all the percentage damage we need, and then we are locked into quarterstaff skills, but we again have access to all the quarterstaff skills and can use whatever feels the best to use, because we now have all the flat and all the percentage damage. And this is what makes stat stacking so great. You can throw any skill on it, and with just the Hands of Wisdom in action, and have all the flat damage you need. Or you can combine it with the Pillar of the Caged God, limiting you to quarterstaff skills, but having all the percentage damage and all the flat damage, so you can really just use any quarterstaff skill that feels great to use and use it to deal massive amount of DPS. So this is why it is so popular, but with that popularity sadly becomes a high demand. The demand is for a lot of the chase uniques. There are so many uniques that stat stacking can use to feel really powerful and just scale crazier and crazier amount of attributes, meaning crazier and crazier amount of damage. So now that we said, oh no, everything is so expensive, everything is such a high demand and you can afford it, can you not start this on a budget? Well, luckily you can do exactly that. Well, I say budget in quotations. The way to start this on a budget is just getting the Hand of Wisdom in action, getting a Pillar of the Caged God, getting any decent Black Sun's crest, and now we should be at about maybe 10 Divines budget. It really depends on what the Hand of Wisdom in action are costing at the moment, but the good thing is they aren't that uncommon. They are fairly common drop from the Breach Boss, but you can just self-farm them yourself with just a little bit of time invested into Breach farming. And once you have them, you're good to go. Everything else of this build can be started on just decent gear, and you can work yourself up by farming content using this build or using a different build. making the items yourself, the breach rings yourself, or buying the uniques or farming the uniques yourself. Everything is possible because they are from the pinnacle enemies, and the build deals so much damage that you can do the pinnacle bosses yourself. So it is definitely startable on a budget. But before going to look at what my build does, I want to talk about what Ascendancy is the best or are the best for this. There are, in my opinion, two Ascendancies that are really great for stat stacking. One being the Gambling Legionnaire and the other is the Invoker. The Gambling Legionnaire has a node called Enhanced Effectiveness, which doubles the inherent bonuses from Strength, Dex, and Int. So you gain for 5 points of for 1 point of strength, you gain, instead of 2 life, you gain 4 life. For 5 points of strength, instead of getting 20 life, you gain 40 life. For 5 points of intelligence, instead of gaining 20 mana, you gain 40 mana. You gain 10 mana, you gain 40 mana. And 5 is 10 life, 20... 10 life, 20 life, sorry. And dexterity, instead of 25 accuracy, you gain 50 accuracy for 5 points of dex. So your inherent bonuses gets better already, meaning we have more life, more mana, and we will never miss an attack. But it also has other great nodes. The small nodes give you 6%, the combined small nodes leading to enhanced effectiveness give you 6% increased attributes. You then have the option to gain additional skill slots, allowing you to have a single target and a mapping setup in the same build, and just needing to use different buttons. You have the potential of using the same support gem on 2 different skills, further utilizing the idea of having a single target and a mapping setup. Or you can say, if you don't need the same support gem, you can go for the plus 10 quality to all gems. Some gems have really powerful quality effects, so this is very good. And then going for the less cost of skills, allowing you, because the skills do consume a lot of mana, just consuming less mana means you can spam your skills more. Also really great option. Or just getting +1 level, if that gives you another threshold on its specific gem, is a good call as well. The other powerful Ascendancy is the Invoker. The Invoker has a very powerful defensive layer that isn't per se needing to be attribute stacking, but it highly benefits the build. So early on a lower budget, when we are focusing on evasion as a defensive layer, we can get Lead Me Through Grace and Protect Me From Harm. Lead Me Through Grace gives us free spirit, because we're using either a rare body armor that we don't have space for spirit, and an amulet where we don't have space for spirit, or we are later on using unique amulet and body armor where we don't have space for spirit. This means free spirit, allowing us to reserve additional spirit gems, is really great. And the node after it, in Protect Me From Harm, reduces our evasion rating, but applies our evasion rating to armor as well, meaning we can scale a lot of evasion rating, dodge hits, and when they do hit, we mitigate the fist damage, and we already mitigate the elemental damage with our elemental resistances, giving us a really great early defensive layer. For late game, however, we have Meditate. In a late game scenario, we might want to just drop all life, drop all evasion rating, and go for Chaos Inoculation, going CI, meaning we are immune to chaos damage but our life is 1. Then go for Mind Over Matter, because we already have a crazy amount of mana from the in-scaling. We now have that mana pool as a defensive layer on top of utilizing it for our damage by spamming our skills. And then we have Energy Shield as a layer in between, which we can scale by utilizing a Heroic Tragedy that now makes our life instead apply to our Energy Shield. So 1 life, 1 strength, instead of giving us 2 flirt life, gives us 1% ES. So with 300 strengths, we now have suddenly 300% Energy Shield. So just having a decent amount of ES, like 500, gets amplified by quite a bit. Of course, it is increased, not more, but it's still very powerful. Now, this is a really great survivability layer, but Ascendancy also has offensive layers. Using something like I Am the Blizzard, gaining 10% of your damage as extra cold damage, meaning that we have an easier time utilizing cold and freeze in our build on top of having all our crazy lightning damage. Or we can use Sunder my enemies, utilizing critical strikes to completely ignore elemental resistances of our enemies. Also a great option. But just because those two Ascendancies are really great, doesn't mean every other Ascendancy is bad. There are many great Ascendancies I've seen being used on stat stacking, so just because your Ascendancy wasn't mentioned here, you can just give it a go on your Ascendancy first, and if it doesn't work, you can still utilize my Trink leveling guide for the stat stacker and just go and level a build that is an Ascendancy that is more your fancy for this specific build. But again, all Ascendancies can do this as long as you have a generically good Ascendancy that utilizes something you do well. It allows you to just utilize stat stacking as well. Stat stacking is super generic, and a generic Ascendancy plus generic scaling means you can do whatever you want with it. Now this out of the way, let's talk about my build. Now we'll quickly talk about the passive tree and the Ascendancy choices before moving on to the important pieces of gear and the gem setup. I have the written guide which is in further detail. If anything is there is unclear or I haven't mentioned here in the video, feel free to message me either in the comment section or the Discord, and I will try to answer as quick as possible, and if needed, edit the guide. The Ascendancy choices I made is, of course, we needed enhanced effectiveness. That's the whole reason to go Gemling Legionnaire. But I wanted to really get the quality into the less cost of skills. However, because of how the early stages of the build needing a different setup to feel great on bossing and mapping, I went with the additional skill slots and the gem started for utilizing support gem twice. In a very, very later version of this build, I think I can unspec this and instead get the quality and the less cost of skills or the level of all skills. But for now, this is the better way to go, because now both mapping and bossing feels really satisfying. I'm nuking bosses out of the world and I'm clearing maps like a crazy amount. This actually feels like a PoE1 build in terms of map clear speed and bossing, because it just does it exactly like in PoE1. Kill bosses before they can do much and clear maps at an insanely fast pace. Now, for the passive tree, the gem and the gear setup, I actually started this whole idea of the stat stacker very, very early. On my first PoE2 build video on my Gas Grenadier, I had a comment. And that comment said that this person is playing a Pillar of the Cage God strength stacker, having 7,000 life and 50,000 armor, and clearing bosses in seconds. And that sounded very intriguing. So since I've read that comment, I already done a lot of just theory crafting of this build and napkin math to figure out if it's viable, if it's not. And I've kept my eyes on every single stat stacker build that I could get my hands on, that I could find on YouTube. And I looked at all of them, and I came to, after looking at everything, after trying out a lot that I was able to try out in my budget level, I came to this as the final setup. And I feel like this is for the budget level of getting the Hand of Wisdom and action till very much 100 divs, 200 divines. This feels the best way to currently play the build. Now, you can go non-crit and crit. It doesn't actually has that much difference. But what is important on the passive tree is stat effective nodes. So what I mean is you want passive nodes that give you stats on top and another bonus. So things like Battle Hardened are really great, giving you a defensive bonus, a double defensive bonus, a really powerful one on top, and then giving you 5 strength and 5 dexterity, the power of 2 attribute highway nodes. Also, we are scaling through the attribute highway, we're grabbing jewel sockets, and then we're grabbing nodes that are point efficient, or just really powerful in on themselves. I will not go into the detail of everything, I will just note a few nodes that are very powerful. And also, because I am limited in the amount of passive trees I can put into the written guide, I will quickly highlight the crit setup, and the passive tree has the non-crit setup. So, good nodes that are just very powerful for attributes are like Polymath. Then we have nodes like Heartbreaking, giving us 10 strength and a crit damage bonus, or Heartstopping, giving us 10 int and a crit chance bonus. Increased dexterity on enhanced reflexes, increased dexterity with proficiency, or flat intelligence with ingenuity. Those are just great nodes. So for the crit setup has the benefit compared to the non-crit setup that it contains a lot of stat effective nodes. So we have we are using just generally good Tainted Strike, generally good Careful Assassin, and then we have stat effective node for the Jugular, crit damage and int, True Strike, dexterity and crit chance, Hard Stopping, intelligence and crit chance, Stuck Through with just a generally good 1% base crit, and then Heartbreaking with crit damage and strength, and Martial Artistry, which we want generally because it's a 3 point for 25 dexterity, being very stat effective, just giving us crit damage and dexterity and accuracy rating. So just very effective node. So this is the passive tree once again for those that want to slowly look at it. For the crit setup, Tainted Strike, having the Heart Stopping into Heartbreaking over Stuck Through, and then having for the Jugular True Strike and Careful Assassin. As keystones, we are utilizing Resonance to have an easy power charge generation. We're using Whispers of Doom to apply a second curse. And we are using Acrobatics because in my current defensive layer is just a bunch of evasion on top of a good amount of life and a little bit of damage taken from mana before life. So this is, once you have more than 10k evasion, Acrobatics sets you down to like 4000 evasion. And if you can stay between 4 and 5000 evasion with Wind Dancer up, you have a really solid evasion pool that works really great on T15s. But yeah, the rest of the passive tree, nothing important that I need to mention here that isn't mentioned in the written guide, so I don't need to double mention it. For the gear, very quickly. To start, you want a Hand of Wisdom in action, a decent Pillar of the Cage God. I went for a Pillar of Cage God with flat cold damage corrupt and using Soul Cores that give me attack speed, because this attack speed is on the base item increase, which means all other sources of increased attack speed are more effective because I have slightly increased my base attack speed. The way you scale things is base, so anything that affects the weapon directly affects the base value. Then you add increased percentages, and then you add the more multipliers. So this for my weapon. Helmet, just generally a high strength conversion because I focused strength initially, but now I would say max intelligence, so a 50% increase intelligence and anything between 10 plus increased strength and dexterity is good enough. Other gear, you want to focus on your rings with either all elemental resistances or chaos element resistance or really high specific resistance roll, and then double stat, intelligence, all attributes, intelligence, dex, intelligence, strength, all great. Prefixes aren't as important on the rings for now. Later on you can go for evasion rating, mana, life, or flat damage. And then body armor, all the evasion. My body gives me, out of my 4.2k evasion, after I use acrobatics, if I drop it, I just go to near zero. The amount of evasion we gain from body armor is truly insane. Do not underestimate an important body armor. Go for a high evasion here. If needed, even go for no life, just go for 1.7k plus evasion rating, preferably even more, and use the suffixes to gain any amount of decent resistances. For boots, again, movement speed, evasion rating, fixing resistances. Belt, life, mana, fixing resistances. Amulet, just getting stats because later on we want Ascendancies here. We want the amulet to not have resistances so that when we use Ascendancies, our resistances are already fixed. Flask, charges per second, amount recovered, and charm, chaos res is important. For the tinctures during campaign, I recommend Elemental Threshold feels right now the best, and Chaos Res feels right now the best. If you eventually want to go CI, you have still a lot of game before you go CI, so the Chaos Res still feels great. If we can later change it, that would be great, but for now, just grab the Chaos Res, it is the best we can have. Unless you are power leveling, then get all elemental resistances and go CI ASAP. Now to the gem setups, and here I have two setups, and I'm not going to go again in too much detail. I just explain why I'm using these in this specific way. For mapping, I have a combo of Shattering Palm into Storm Wave. Shattering Palm has Electrocute, so I'm dashing at an enemy, apply a chunk of ice. This chunk of ice is also applied to other enemies in the area. when we then do damage to those enemies with Storm Wave, which also is actually pretty long, pretty wide, it deals now the lightning damage to them, fills the condition to charge the chunks of ice or shards of ice, and then those explode. And this causes massive screen explosions that are feeling great in rituals, great in breaches, great during delirium maps, great on expeditions. This just feels insanely good for mapping. It is a 2-button mapping, but it feels incredibly good. It feels even better than Herald of Ice Explosion, which we can't really use because we are mainly dealing lightning damage, not cold damage. We're not actually freezing most of our enemies. For single target, I'm using a Tempest Flurry Tempest Bell cast on shock setup. So first we use Hands of Chayula to dash to the enemy. Once they are cursed with Voltaic Mark, Conductivity, and Feeble, we then hit them a bunch with Tempest Flurry, which has an insanely fast attack speed. Then we have a little bit of cold damage, which is why I got the Corrupt on my weapon. This will proc Freeze on the Tempest Bell, which then gives us the Ice Bite, 35% of damage is cold damage. Now we have on top of our massive lightning damage a lot of cold damage, which is we scale with our generic weapon attack damage. So we can freeze and shock bosses at the same time. So now that we are on the boss, we have frozen, maybe we have even frozen the boss. We deal a lot of damage to it, but the main damage dealer is the Tempest spell. The Tempest spell means it needs to be supported by as many damage supports as we can. Now, to further hit the bell, we are dropping out of Combat Frenzy and Herald of Thunder on a boss, and we instead grab Cast on Shock. This means that when we shock the bell or the boss, we gain a bunch of energy that then casts Eye of Winter, which we have chained. So it hits the bell, or it hits the boss, and then it chains to the bell and hits the bell more. So we have an insane amount of hits on the bell, causing an insane amount of just shockwaves from the bell that then damage the boss. Now the bell only has 24 hits, so the quality on the bell is very important. This is the highest importance on quality. Do not try to get a non-quality bell. We need as much quality as we can here, which is also why the 10 quality on the Ascendancy is interesting. So we get overabundance so that we can stack up a second bell where we attack the first bell and replace the bell as fast as possible, allowing us to do even more damage. Now this of course also nukes our mana. And an important notice here, GGG has shown that they are ready to nerf interactions that they deem too powerful. They already have nerfed Cast on Shock, so they might just further nerf that Cast on Shock isn't actually applicable on the bell, so the bell doesn't give you charges anymore. If that happens, I already have other ideas to further improve our single target damage, and the written guide will be updated if that is the case. If you don't see Cast on Shock on the written guide, it got updated and we needed to adjust. A quick addition, my just now self that recorded the initial video has forgotten. And a really great thing about Tempest Flurry for late game variations is that it has a forced forward movement. So if you use Tempest Flurry with a really insane amount of attack speed, it gets even faster than walking. So if we just walk here with my Storm Wave, you see how slow it is. If I just walk normally, you see this speed. But if I use Tempest Flurry, I'm actually faster than my normal walking speed by a little bit, or maybe as fast. So the more I scale my attack speed, the faster this moves, allowing us for a high endgame variant to just be fully only utilizing Tempest Flurry to move through a map at an insanely fast pace. Now all this being said, the video doesn't have to be longer than it has to be. If this was informationful, if this has helped you create your own stat stacking build, I would highly appreciate a thumbs up to the video, and I would appreciate a subscribe to the channel, helping me grow, and this means that my video reaches more people that it's helpful to. All this being said, have a wonderful day, goodbye.